The knock came just after supper, brisk and entitled, the kind that assumes the door will open. I wiped my hands on a towel, slid the deadbolt, and there stood Evan with a rolling suitcase and Theo's backpack on his shoulder. My grandson's eyes were wide, shining the way children's eyes do when they sense a change before anyone names it. "Mom," Evan said, skipping hello. "I've got to fly to Denver. Meetings, networking, last minute." He pushed past me into the entry as he talked. The suitcase thunked upright. Its zipper fought to hold. When he tightened the strap, a palm print shirt and a tube of sunscreen winked through the mesh. Theo pressed into his father's side. "Am I going too?" "Not this time, buddy." Evan ruffled his hair without looking down. "Grandma will take care of you. She always does. Always does." The words landed like an accounting entry, not a thank you. "How long?" I asked. "School meals pickups I need to plan. A week, maybe less. I'll text." Keys chattered in his hand. By the time I opened my mouth again, the screen door was groaning on its spring and March air was tumbling down the hall. Evan took the porch steps 2 at a time and crossed the sidewalk with the loose gait of a man late for something fun. He did not look back. We were left with the suitcase, the backpack, and the quiet a slammed door leaves behind. Theo's fingers curled around mine. I poured him milk and pretended the glass didn't tremble when I set it down. Morning brought frost on the window and the cough of the coffee maker. Theo drew at the table rocket ships, a cat in a helmet. My phone buzzed on the counter. Denise, my cousin who knows news before the news does, had sent a message. "Thought you should see this." A screenshot filled the screen. Evan tanned by no. Wisconsin sun smiled from the deck of a catamaran. A young woman in a silver dress leaned into him. Harbor lights stitched the water. The caption read, "Pacific Nights with my favorite person, Mira." I recognized the name from a story I had dismissed at Christmas because dismissal felt easier than deciding what to do. On the screen, rumor had teeth. "Can we go to the park after school?" Theo asked. Of course I said, and meant it for him alone. The coffee tasted metallic. After the bus sighed him away, I rinsed the pan and stacked plates. Habit is an engine that hums whether or not your heart is in it. I tallied groceries, gas, the field trip fee at the bottom of Theo's folder. Evan hadn't sent so much as a message. My pension would stretch the way fabric stretches when you pull slowly and breathe shallow, but every weave has limits. At the store, I compared labels and chose the house brand. Back home, I mended a seam on Theo's backpack and wrote his initials inside his jacket so the lost and found would know where to aim. We were out of printer paper. I signed the permission slip on the back of an old envelope. Small accommodations, private and constant. Evenings settled into their pattern. Homework, dishes, bath, the question, "When will Dad come back?" Theo asked the first night. At the end of the week, I said. The second night, soon. By the third, I smoothed his hair and chose silence. Time is a risky promise to make on someone else's behalf. When he slept, I laid the bills along the kitchen table under the weak lamp. The refrigerator hummed. I added figures twice. The pension covered heat, light, and groceries if I was careful. The rest went on the card I kept promising to pay down when life became less expensive. It is a particular feeling to stand in your own kitchen and move like staff. Pack the lunch, fold the jersey, scrub the pan until your hands smell like lemon and metal. Love fills a room. It does not pay the balance. I clip coupons. I set the alarm for 6 because Theo eats better when the morning isn't a chase. When a toe pushes through his sneakers, I buy new ones and tell myself it's fine because for him it is. Wednesday, the class needed snacks for a reading party. I signed up for oranges and worried about the price for the length of the weather report. I bought them anyway. After school, Theo peeled 2 at the table and told me about a classmate who draws dragons with 3 heads. I put the peels in the bin and thanked him for helping. The next afternoon, I cleaned the coat closet just to finish something. Evan's suitcase waited in the entry like a guest who refuses to take a hint. I slid it beneath the bed. A faint line of sand stitched across the floorboards. San Diego, I thought, and then I thought of Theo's spelling list instead. That evening, the seam near the toe of Theo's sneakers gave up. We would make it to the weekend and then I'd find a sale. He didn't complain. He is the kind of child who apologizes to chairs when he bumps them. "Eggs or oatmeal?" I asked in the morning. "Oatmeal," he said. "With the brown sugar that hides first." It's a trick my husband once taught Evan when money was thinner than it is now. Theo grinned when his spoon found the sweet. Friday brought a note from school about the lunch account. I wrote a check, watched the ink dry, and slid it into his folder. The amount was small enough to pretend I wasn't counting it. None of this surprised me. What rose instead was a quiet heat like a kettle you forget until it speaks. Not rage is messy and loud. This was steadier, a refusal waking. Each task permission slip mended seam oranges, check stacked on the last, until I could feel their weight settle beneath my ribs. Late that night, I stood at the sink and looked out at the street. A fox crossed under the lamplight, breath unspooling in a pale ribbon. Theo's backpack leaned against the chair where he always drops it, the canvas shiny at the corners. I pressed my palm to the table and felt the grain of the wood. The house was the same as Monday, and I was the same woman. Still, something had shifted. Not a crack. Not yet. But the week's floor had moved under my feet, and I steadied myself against the edge of the table. By Saturday, the snow along the curb had surrendered into a gray lace of slush, and Theo insisted on wearing his paper crown from the library story hour to the grocery store. I let him. The crown made our aisle look less tired. We picked apples one by one, knocking on them as if they were doors to small bright rooms, and I pretended not to notice the way the price per pound had inched higher. Back home, he built a city from cereal boxes and the shoelace I had saved from an old pair of boots. He threaded cars through tunnels and announced traffic reports in a broadcaster's voice. Watching him, I could not help but see another boy on another floor, Evan at the same age, dragging a broken tape measure across the linoleum to mark lanes for his Matchbox derby. When he crashed 2 trucks, he cried as if the trucks were real and his fault. I sat with him under the table until the noise settled. Memory is a room that opens when you don't ask it to. The door swung wider when just after lunch the cough I'd been ignoring in Theo pressed deeper and refused to be coaxed away by tea. He coughed until he had to sit and breathe through his nose to find air. I touched his forehead and felt heat under the skin, a heat that carried its own pulse. "Let's make the couch into a boat," I said, because naming a boat is easier than naming worry. I layered blankets and gave him the remote. He laughed once, a small bright sound, and then tucked himself into the corner with his knees close. By dinner, the skin on his cheeks glowed, and when I asked him to take a sip of water, he looked past me, not at me. The thermometer sang its small electronic note, and the number flickered before landing, 103.7. It was a number that woke the body in me quicker than coffee. I moved on the track. I know the track any mother or grandmother knows. Tylenol. Cool cloth. Call the clinic. Grab the bag I keep ready, because life is a teacher that repeats lessons until you stop pretending not to understand them. In the car, the streets were colorless and mercifully empty. Theo leaned against the seat and murmured to himself about the cereal box city. I turned up the heat to keep his hands from shivering and parked in front of Riverside Immediate Care, where the light is always a little too bright and the chairs always a little too low. We checked in. We sat. Waiting rooms are their own kind of clock. The woman across from us scrolled on her phone, mouth open, and the teenager, 2 seats down, spoke softly to someone whose voice I could not hear. Theo pressed his forehead to my shoulder and fell into the watery sleep of a child caught between fever and exhaustion. My phone vibrated, a soft rattle against the vinyl arm of the chair. For a moment, I thought of airline delays or storms over Denver and felt a foolish, quick hope. I pulled the phone out my finger, already finding Evan's name. I called. The ring held steady. It is strange how much a ring can sound like a flat heart monitor when the ear waits. Voicemail. I hung up and called again because people believe that the second time is more persuasive. Voicemail. The nurse called us back. Theo obeyed small instructions with the seriousness of a soldier. Open your mouth. Hold this under your tongue. Breathe while I listen. His lashes made crescents against the swollen flesh of his cheeks. The doctor arrived with a kind face that did not oversell optimism. Viral infection, he said. Fluids, acetaminophen, rest. If the breathing changes, come back. I nodded and asked 2 questions just to make a shape of control. The doctor's pen glided. He wrote down dosages and slid the paper to me like an answer key. When we returned to the car, the lot had gone quiet and the light on the clinic sign buzzed. I buckled Theo in and stood with my hand on the doorframe, breathing the cold air like a cure. My phone flashed again. A new text rolled to the top from Marjorie, who sings alto beside me at church and has never learned to use punctuation as anything other than flourish. Isn't this even ? And then a link. I should have ignored it, but should is as weightless as breath in that parking lot. I opened the link and watched a slow-loading video resolve into Evan at a rooftop bar. Not Denver. That was the Pacific behind him, or a city built to pretend it was the Pacific. Mira leaned her head on his shoulder. He tipped a flute toward the camera, and the caption at the bottom in the bar's white font read, "Sundown over the harbor." A car door thunked somewhere behind me. Theo coughed in the back seat, dry and deep, and when I lowered myself into the driver's seat, it felt as if I had been walking for a very long time and just remembered there was a chair. I did not call him again. Not because I wanted to punish him, and not because punishment would have reached him where he was, but because it is a kind of confusion to hold a phone that tells one story while the seat beside you tells another. At home, I tucked Theo into my bed and set a bowl of cool water on the nightstand. He slept with his mouth open, a child's necessary inelegance. The room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and wool. I stood at the window for the length of the streetlight's cycle and watched the fox appear again and then disappear between the hedges. My reflection looked older than I had felt earlier in the day, which is merely to say my reflection told the truth. I went to the kitchen and found a lined notebook at the bottom of the drawer that also holds rubber bands and menus and keys to doors I no longer own. On the first page, I wrote date and time and then the sentence simply fever, 103.7. Riverside immediate care instructions, fluids acetaminophen. Beneath that, I wrote called Evan at 7:42 p.m., no answer. Called again at 7:51 p.m., no answer. It felt strange to write what I had lived less than an hour earlier. Strange and in some unnameable way, right. The notebook made lines. Lines make a path when the day refuses to. On Sunday, Theo's fever softened into the kind of heat the hand reads as a caution, not a siren. He ate toast and fell asleep with his head on the table, a perfect circle of cheek and bread. I carried him to the couch and covered him in the old stadium blanket with the faded orange M. When he woke, we argued cheerfully about whether dinosaurs preferred pancakes or waffles, and I let him win, because it cost me nothing and cost him nothing, and not everything requires an accounting. By afternoon, I had found the clinic printout and slid it into a plastic sleeve from an old report. The sleeve did not fit perfectly. Nothing about this did. I added the sleeve to a file folder with a tab I labeled THEO, because words in capital letters are promises you make to yourself where no one else can overhear. That night, when the house had quieted and Theo's breathing leveled, I drafted a message to Evan that read, "Theo needed urgent care last night, but is better today. Please call me." I deleted the last 3 words and wrote simply, "Theo needed urgent care last night. He is better today." I sent it. The message sat gray and patient on my screen. No dots appeared. On Monday, the world put on its weekday face as it always does. The bus sighed at the corner, and I waved to Theo through the smudged window as he flashed me the sign he believes means I love you, but in fact means rock on. I waved anyway. The house closed its mouth around the quiet. I made coffee and without deciding, found myself calling a number printed on a flyer I'd seen tacked to the corkboard at the library near the tax forms and flyers for piano lessons. The flyer had a clean font and no promise it couldn't keep family law custody guardianship support. Initial consults available. A woman answered with a voice that knew how to separate the essential from the noise. "Kemp and Harlan," she said. "How can we help?" "I'm not sure yet," I said, which was both honest and not useful. "My name is Margaret. I'm caring for my grandson. His father, my son, is away, without arrangement." She listened longer than many receptionists would have. "We can get you in this afternoon with Ms. Kemp if you like." I looked at the clock as if the clock could tell me who I was. "Yes," I said, "I would like that." The office sat on the second floor of a small brick building next to a tailor who changes zippers for a fair price. The stairwell smelled like rain and carpet cleaner. Inside, a plant tried and failed to flourish under fluorescent light. Ms. Kemp came to the waiting area herself. Hand extended, her expression unseasoned by pity. We sat in a room with a window that looked out on the tail of the alleys. She did not rush me. I told her about the suitcase on the porch, the catamaran, the rooftop bar, the clinic at night, the unanswered calls, the way Theo asks his question, and I have begun to answer with quiet. She took notes on a legal pad with a pen that clicked. When I finished, she asked narrow questions that made the outline of our lives look unforgiving and precise. How long has the child been in your care without overnight breaks? When was the last transfer of funds from the father to the child's direct needs? Do you have documentation of medical treatment, school communications? Any messages or calls attempted? I answered as best I could. When I did not have a number, I had a description. She did not flinch at imprecision. She made a list to correct it. "There are remedies," she said at last with the same tone a nurse uses when telling you the dose and the schedule. "You have a strong argument for temporary guardianship. Judges prefer stability for children, and you are the stable placement. I recommend that you begin recording everything that touches the child's welfare: dates, times, costs, communication attempts. Keep copies. Screenshots are evidence, so are call logs. We can file if and when you decide to file." Somewhere in a different version of my life, I would have cried then from relief or grief, or the stored-up rain in the barrel. In this life, I nodded and accepted the packet she slid across the table. The packet had tabs. The tabs had names: medical, school, financial, communications. I put the packet into my bag and felt the bag alter the way a body's balance changes when it picks up a sleeping child. On my way out, I paid the consult fee and did not check my phone until I reached the street. No messages. The sky had moved from bright to white. On the bus bench, a boy no older than Theo stamped the crust of snow with his heel until it came free like a tile. At home, I cleared the end of the dining table that had accumulated the mail and the repairman's card and the hummingbird magnet. Theo insists belongs there. I set the packet down, opened the notebook, and wrote the date again. I wrote appointment with Ms. Kemp. Recommendations: keep records, keep copies. Begin today. I began. The first entry after the clinic notes was simply the grocery receipt from the morning I had bought apples and milk and the cereal that pretends to be healthier than it is. I taped the receipt to the page. It looked simultaneously ridiculous and essential ridiculous because everyone buys groceries. Essential because in our house, I buy ours. Next, I printed the clinic discharge summary and slid it behind the tab marked medical. I pulled up my phone records and circled 2 outgoing calls to Evan, both unanswered. I took screenshots of the rooftop bar video from Marjorie's link and printed the still that made his smile look like a photograph from a brochure. School sent a reminder about Thursday's spelling test and Friday's field trip. I saved the email to a folder marked school and then printed it because paper has a way of staying when files go on walkabout. I added the lunch account statement to the stack because it had my signature where a parent's goes. The stack grew with a logic that did not need to declare itself. When Theo returned from school, his color had returned to the shade I call normal, a word whose meaning refits itself to each house. He threw his backpack to the same chair and told me before I could ask the exact number of times Jackson had made a new world record at the monkey bars. We did homework words with silent letters, and he added an extra LA to should because the word had earned it. I did not argue. He earned his dessert by tasting the spinach as if it were medicine, and then announcing, nose wrinkled but polite, that it was not bad for leaves. After he fell asleep, I made tea and kept going. A binder would be better than a folder. I found one in the hall closet, a crimson 3-inch with a clear sleeve on the front. It had once held tax returns from a year when we still itemized. I slid the word Theo into the sleeve. Inside, I made sections with the tabs Ms. Kemp had given me and wrote beneath each the first page number of a book that would not be read by anyone who wasn't required to. I dated each page. The dates marched. I did not write summaries beyond what the page demanded. I did not write impressions. The binder was not for impressions. When I reached the bottom of the pile, I went looking for more. The junk drawer surrendered a few receipts I had meant to throw away. The shoebox in the bedroom held printed photographs, and among them the 3 of us at the county fair when Evan won a goldfish by tossing a ring over a bottleneck was an old invoice from the community center for Theo's swim lessons paid by my check. I wrote paid by M in the margin and slid it behind financial. The binder made a sound when I closed it, a flat, confident thud. On Tuesday, I called the school nurse and asked her to print the form she had taken when Theo was evaluated that morning for the echo of the fever. She did. I stopped by the office with a tin of shortbread left over from Christmas and received the paper and made a note to buy more shortbread because it is a cheap way to honor the people who tuck tissues into children's hands and make notes when they should make notes. On Wednesday, Mrs. Alvarez from 2 doors down knocked with a bag of sourdough rolls and a proposal she could take Theo after school 2 days this week so I could do grown-up errands without pretending guilt is an errand too. I thanked her and accepted one day. When she left, I wrote her name on a piece of paper and slid it behind communications because favors are a currency the court understands even if dollars are not attached. I kept calling Evan once each evening. Not to perform ritual, not to allow myself the later balm of saying I tried, but because it is true that a father should know his child had a fever. My calls went unanswered. Once the phone skipped the rings and stepped straight into voicemail as if the line knew the choreography of dismissal and had decided to streamline it. If I had allowed myself, the nights would have belonged to the math of regret. Instead, I let them belong to the binder, which did not require my heart to argue with itself. Between the tab sections, I slipped the screenshot Denise had sent the catamaran, the silver dress, the line of harbor lights that looked like a seam, hemming a darkness that would otherwise come apart. I added Marjorie's rooftop still beneath it, the 2 images speaking to each other in a language that photographs understand: time, place, face. By week's end, the notebook had a small weight. The kind of weight a person feels when they hold a good stone and know, without quite knowing why, that it should be kept. The binder sat on the counter, clean-backed and thickening with the word I had chosen, staring out from its sleeve. The house had the same number of rooms it had on Monday. The chair still wore the dent of Theo's backpack. My hands smelled of paper and dish soap. When I turned off the lamp that night, the room gathered itself. I laid my palm on the binder's cover as if it were a door. I had finished hanging straight, and in the quiet that followed, I recognized the steadiness I had been reaching toward, without calling it a name. In the morning, the binder sat where I had left it, square as a brick in the middle of the dining table. I set my coffee beside it and ran a dishcloth over a ring the mug had made the night before. The cloth left a darker circle that disappeared as the wood drank it in. Some marks vanish if you blot in time. I called Miss Kemp when the clock rolled to 9. I'd like to move forward, I said. She did not ask with what. By noon, she had drafted an emergency petition for temporary guardianship and sent it for my signature through a system that makes your name appear on the screen the way it does when a package arrives at the post office. I read each line, then signed. When her paralegal called to say the duty judge was available at 2, I found Theo's teacher's voicemail and left a message that he might be a little late getting home. The courthouse is the same, no matter the county. Keys in a tray, shoes that refuse to come off gracefully. A guard with a gentle voice that contradicts the belt and badge. Miss Kemp met me by the elevator with a folder whose tab said, M. Hollis. Henri Theo Hollis. The tab looked too official for our small lives and entirely appropriate at the same time. We stood in a hallway painted a color that meant nothing and waited our turn. When the clerk called our case in a voice that did not belong to a person but to a building, we stepped into a courtroom with no jury box and a judge who wore his kindness in the position of his eyebrows. Ms. Kemp spoke. I did not. She laid the facts the way a good nurse lays the tools on a tray in order visible ready. The judge read the petition, signed the interim order, and handed it back to the clerk, who stamped it with a noise that made something in my chest loosen. The clerk wrote a case number across the top in navy ink and underlined it twice. We were given a copy and a date to return. It took 14 minutes. When we stepped back into the hallway, the old air smelled the same, and yet not the way a room does after a storm moves through somewhere no one can see. I was home in time to wave at the school bus and walk Theo inside. He leaned into my side as we crossed the lawn, a habit he has kept since he was small enough to fit on my hip. I made him cocoa and did not mention the courthouse. He told me about a classmate who can whistle by using 2 fingers and a look of ferocious concentration. After dinner, he built another city with the cereal boxes, and I took the stamped order from my bag and slid it into the binder under a new plastic sleeve. The binder did not change shape. I did. By Wednesday, the closets had surrendered what we did not need, and the things we did watched us from open boxes as if to say, decide already. I made piles donate, keep for later keep. Because one day Theo will want to see the photograph of his father holding a fish at the county fair while pretending to enjoy it. Mrs. Alvarez took Theo to the park so I could collect the breakables without answering questions I wasn't prepared to fold into small shapes. I wrapped the blue bowl my mother brought from her first apartment and thought how a life is a nest of dishes wrapped and unwrapped across decades. The apartment near the lake was a narrow second-floor walk-up with windows that refused to stay open without a book lodged under the frame. Mr. Patel, the landlord, kept a pencil behind his ear even when he did not need one. He showed me the furnace room and the back stairs and pointed from the kitchen window to a triangle of yard that was technically common but used like yours if you're fast. The lease was a page and a half. I signed where he pointed and wrote a check in the careful hand of a person who has practiced writing checks for many years and prefers to do it less. Theo and I carried the first boxes up together. He took the light ones and declared himself in charge of soft things. Pillows and stuffed animals made a parade up the steps. On the second trip, he whispered to the dinosaur on his t-shirt that this wasn't a migration but a reposition. He liked the sound of the word and said it until it turned into music. I moved the kitchen table last, its legs wrapped in towels, its surface a battlefield of old nicks and new resolve. We ate our first meal on it, sitting on the floor, 2 slices of pizza, and 1 paper plate that performed double duty and argued affectionately about whether the pepperoni pieces looked like planets or shields. When Theo was asleep on his mattress, a borrowed twin with clean sheets and the stadium blanket tucked under his chin, I sat at the new table and addressed an envelope to Evan's apartment. I slid a copy of the judge's interim order inside along with a short letter in the smallest words available. Theo is living with me. I have temporary guardianship by court order. If you want to talk, call. If you want to see him, we will arrange it with me present. I signed my name and included Ms. Kemp's card because business-like paper allows fewer misreadings than a voice can. I mailed another copy certified because a piece of paper with a green stripe persuades when courtesy does not. I left 1 more envelope on the dining table in my old house for the afternoon he would eventually walk in with his smile ready and his story revised. I did not add commentary. I did not add the video still from the bar or the photograph from the catamaran. I set the order inside and laid my pen across the top the way a person does when they want an object to look less alone. I locked the door, slid the spare key through the mail slot, and stood for a breath with my hand on the cool glass of the storm door before walking to the car. That night, Theo arranged his cars in an oval on the bare floor of his new room. Every lap began in front of the closet and ended under the window. It's a track, he said. There's a finish line, but it isn't the end. I sat in the hall and watched his shadow follow his car along the baseboards, a softer echo. When he yawned, he tried to hide it and failed in the adorable way children fail at hiding anything. I carried him to bed with the kind of care a person uses for one-of-a-kind things. Thursday brought 2 phone calls. The first was from Denise, who has a cousin she doesn't speak to but still hears from. "He's back," she said. "Airport this morning, tall tale in tow." The second call appeared without a name, just the city and the suddenness of an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail and listened after the beep had done its small jump. Evan's voice filled the kitchen. "Mom, pick up. I'm at your house. Where are you?" "Where's Theo? Don't play games with me." He hung up and called again. The third time he left only breath and the scrape of the phone against fabric, and then the sharp snap of a man deciding to be angrier than he is afraid. I did not return the call. Instead, I wiped the counter and set out plates for dinner so I wouldn't have to clatter them later. The apartment found its evening pots, smoothing to a simmer, the wall clock discovering a reliable tick. Theo repeating his spelling words with his thumb pressed to his bottom lip, as if his lip were a button that activated memory. When the knock came, it came like a fist that had practiced on doors. I opened the door halfway. Evan stood in the hall with his shoulders held back and a tan that had the wrong geography for our city. Mira hung a pace behind him wearing sunglasses that had forgotten the sun. The hallway smelled like damp wool and old varnish, and the light bounced off the framed evacuation plan as if it were trying to escape it. "So this is where you've hidden," he said, taking a step forward and then stopping because my body made a line his hadn't planned to meet. "You can't just take my kid and vanish. Do you know what this is going to look like?" "Like you didn't knock before you pounded," I said. "Lower your voice." Theo was doing his spelling. I left the door open and walked to the table because I wanted to choose the ground on which this happened. The binder waited where I had placed it, a patient thing. I placed the interim order beside it and smoothed the top page with 2 fingers. Evan followed and put his hands on the back of a chair as if claiming it would claim the room. "You're not going to get away with this." "I'm not trying to get away with anything," I said. "I am trying to care for a child who lives here and is finishing the word night with a silent K." Mira's gaze had shifted from me to the paper on the table. Even in the dim hall light, you can see when a person recognizes a document that carries a weight she cannot flirt past. She touched Evan's elbow. "Maybe let her say what this is," she said. Voice low, sunglasses forgotten on her head like a headband for a girl playing dress-up. "This," I said, and tapped the top of the stack, "is a court order granting me temporary guardianship. There will be a hearing. Until then, Theo's home is here. With me." "That's not legal," he said, as if saying so made it so. "It's signed by a judge," I said. "The legality belongs to the pen and the stamp, not our voices." He read without reading, the way a person looks at words and tries to tilt the page until it agrees with him. Color rose along his neck. "You did this while I was gone." "I did this when you were absent," I said, because absent paints a different picture than gone. "While Theo had a fever of 103 and you were unreachable." He barked a humorless laugh. "You're being dramatic. Kids get fevers. You always make things bigger than they are." I opened the binder. One by one, I laid down pages the way a person lays down tiles, evenly edge to edge until a surface appears where there was none. Grocery receipts, the clinic summary, the call log with 2 unanswered calls on a night when the parking lot had 1 light working and the air felt like glass. A lunch account note with my signature tucked into the line that says parent or guardian. School emails printed for the day they are needed because paper stays when batteries die. Each page landed with the small polite sound paper makes when it meets wood. The sound formed a sentence that did not require verbs. Mira's hand dropped from his elbow. She set her purse on her shoulder. The sunglasses slid a fraction of an inch down her hair and stopped. "I'll wait outside," she said. To the hallway to the stairwell, not to him. She left with a small click of heel on wood, a sound that did not apologize or stay to argue. The air in the room sharpened when she was gone as if the temperature had changed. Evan stood in front of the evidence that refused to be coaxed into another shape. He tried again to shift it with volume. "This proves you're a control freak. It proves you have always wanted to take over. This proves," I said, and pushed the call log closer so he could not pretend it was fuzzed or feeble what happened when I called. "It proves who paid when payment was due. It proves where Theo slept. It proves what his temperature was when a thermometer said the number out loud." He stared at the paper and then at me. His jaw worked. For a moment, the boy who had called me at 17 from the side of the road, voice shaking mom. I messed up, stood in front of me, then the man returned, the man with his hands on a borrowed chair and a tan wearing thin. "You've poisoned him," he said softly, as if this time the quiet could wedge its way under the facts. "I have given him dinner shoes that fit, and a bed," I said. "He is doing his spelling. If you would like to say hello at the door, you may. We will not discuss this in front of him. You can call Ms. Kemp tomorrow to arrange a time to see him with me present." "This is kidnapping." He tried grasping for a word with teeth. "This is guardianship," I said, and put my hand on the order not like a threat, but like a witness. He looked toward the hallway where Mira had disappeared, then back at the pages. Anger flickered and faltered, not because I had triumphed, but because anger has difficulty breathing where documentation occupies the air. His hands left the chair. He took a step back. For a beat, the room was exactly what it was, a small apartment with a kitchen table, a binder, a woman and a man learning the limits of a performance. "Say hello to Theo," I said. He stood in the doorway of the bedroom and said the word "hey" in a voice that belonged to a stranger trying to pass as familiar. Theo looked up from his worksheet, saw his father, and arranged his face into politeness without knowing he was doing it. He lifted his pencil. "We're doing silent letters," he said. "The K doesn't talk." Evan nodded, said, "Good," and pretended he had always known the K was quiet. In the kitchen, the refrigerator sighed. The two of them moved in a script without lines. After 15 seconds that felt like a postcard, Evan stepped back into the living room. He stood there, chin up, and then let it fall a degree. "I'll talk to a lawyer," he said. "Good," I said, because good is a word that belongs to no one. He looked at the binder one more time and made the smallest motion with his lips, as if the documents were the ones worth arguing with. He turned, opened the door, and left. The stairwell echoed. A beat later, the echo stopped and the hallway was only itself again. I gathered the papers, slid them into their sleeves, and closed the binder. It made it sound flat, ordinary, final. Theo called from the bedroom, "Grandma is night." "Night? The one that fights or the one with a day in it?" "The one that fights," I said. "The day one is with a G." He considered this and then returned to his list with the concentration of a scientist. I set the binder on the counter where the morning light would find it and washed 2 plates by hand because the dishwasher in the new place grumbles, and I did not want more noise. Later, when Theo slept, I sat by the window and watched the lake turn its dark coin under the streetlight. Across the alley, someone's television flickered, heatless blue. The apartment had begun to learn our sounds. The wood creaked in places that would soon stop startling me. I made tea and stood with the cup in my hands until the steam left it. On the table, the order lay where I had put it because paper stays where you place it until a hand moves it. I switched off the kitchen light and the room accepted the quiet, as if it had been waiting for it all along. The weekend laid itself out like a tablecloth, plain, serviceable, and clean. Theo woke early and padded to the kitchen, dragging his blanket like a cape. He asked for pancakes shaped like letters, and I poured batter into a K because he remains loyal to silent ones. After breakfast, he taped a paper sun to his window so the light would know where to land. When he ran a lap of the living room with his cars, he paused at the doorway of his room and looked in as if it might answer back. We bought a small can of paint the color the store called Sky at noon. Mr. Patel let us borrow a roller with a handle that clicked when you extended it. I spread old newspapers on the floor, and Theo wore the t-shirt with the green dinosaur and the stain that resists even the stubborn soaps. He painted too hard at first, leaving greedy streaks, and learned to press lightly so the color evened. The room brightened in a way that had nothing to do with wattage. When the wall dried, he stood with his hands on his hips and said with the satisfaction of a foreman, "Now the morning won't get lost." At the park, he chased a ball that bounced in ways his legs could not predict. I sat on the cold bleacher and tucked the stadium blanket around my knees, the M faded but not gone. When he scored by accident but decisively, he turned to find me with the same instinct that makes birds find north. His grin stretched wide and I lifted my hand. We were not the loudest pair. We were the pair that stayed until the last backpack zipped. Evenings took their shape without asking permission. Homework spread across the table in a fan math with cramped numbers, vocabulary with arrows that connected cousins. We tried new dinners and rescued old ones. He learned to rinse his plate and stack it proud of the ceramic clink. We read chapters out loud, trading paragraphs, and he corrected my dragon sound when I didn't give it enough smoke. Some nights he fell asleep before we finished, and I closed the book with my finger marking the place. I left the finger there a while longer than needed. One night after the dishes and the list of sight words and the argument with the zipper on his pajamas, I tucked the blanket under his chin and switched off the lamp that throws stars on the ceiling. Theo watched the faint constellations reorganize themselves and said not as a question, "This is home now." The words landed with a weight that did not bruise. I smoothed his hair and did not answer aloud because not every true thing requires an echo. Days later, near dusk, the knock came again. Not the practiced pounding that announces an argument, not the brisk 3 taps of a delivery, but a patient, uncertain sound, like someone testing a step in the dark. The hallway smelled of wet wool, and the light flickered once before committing. When I opened the door, Evan stood there alone. The tan had drained to a color that belongs to late nights and cheap lamps. His sweatshirt slouched at the elbows. He had not shaved. The brightness he wore like a jacket had fallen off somewhere and not followed him home. "Mom," he said, and the word carried a crack I recognized from a long time ago. "I need to see Theo. Please. Just me and him." I kept my hand on this door frame because wood steadies better than air. Inside, Theo coughed, once the harmless kind, the tale of an old worry, and the sound crossed the room like a thread, pulling me where I already stood. "You can visit," I said, and made sure my voice did not add apology. It did not but not alone. "We do it here or somewhere with me present." He exhaled like a man who had been holding his breath for a block and a half. "I lost my job," he said, as if the facts might enroll themselves if he called roll. "Mirror left. I'm staying with a friend. He stopped and rubbed his face with both hands. "I need my son." I thought of the binder on the counter of call logs and clinic summaries and receipts that had no story to tell beyond the obvious. I thought of the boy in the next room who had taped a paper sun to the glass so light would not get lost. I did not think about mercy or punishment. I thought about the room we stood in and the rooms we were obliged to keep whole. "You can see him with me," I said again. "You can call Ms. Kemp to set it up. Unsupervised visits aren't happening." His shoulders sagged, and for a small second he looked his age when his age was 7 and the goldfish from the fair had died before the water settled. Then the man returned, the one who measures the edges of a request and checks for shortcuts. "Please," he said a little softer. "Just the two of us. I'll take him for ice cream and bring him right back." "Not tonight," I said, "not alone." He sat on the top step as if the next part of the conversation required a different altitude. He covered his face with his hands, elbows on his knees, and when the first sound came, it was the rough sound a person makes when pride loosens its jaw. He stayed like that long enough for the hallway light to click and start again. I waited. Waiting can be a kindness or a strategy. In that moment, it was neither. It was simply what happened. When he lifted his head, his eyes were red in a way that had nothing to do with wind. "I don't know where to go," he said. The admission sloppy and plain. "I don't have a plan." "I'm not a plan," I said. "I'm Theo's grandmother. We'll set a time for you to see him here with me. That's what I can do." He nodded, once the smallest agreement a neck can make and still be counted. From Theo's room came the sound of a car being parked with care. "Can I at least say goodnight?" "You can stand in the doorway," I said. He did, and he kept his hands at his sides. "Hey, champ," he said. "Sleep tight." Theo, already drifting, lifted a hand without opening his eyes and wiggled his fingers. "Night, Dad." The syllables fit in the space like mismatched furniture that still serves. At the door, Evan tried for a different approach. "Could I just for tonight crash on the couch?" he asked, half a plea and half the old angle that assumes a concession will produce another. "No," I said. The word was not an iron gate. It was a latch that clicks and keeps a door hung straight. He closed his eyes for a moment and then opened them. The look on his face, not a mask falling, but a man realizing the mask he had been using no longer fit. "I'll call the lawyer," he said. "Do," I said. He stood. The hallway returned to its regular size. Shoes on the next stair made the small drumbeat old buildings know by heart. The door shut behind him the way doors do when they are asked to behave themselves. The apartment listened for a moment, and hearing nothing that required it, exhaled. Inside, the kettle ticked as it cooled. I turned off the hall light and let the dim of the living room take back the edges. The binder sat on the counter where morning would find it again. I did not touch it. I did not need its thud. I switched off the lamp in Theo's room, and in the half-dark, his paper sun watched over the square of sky that the window allowed. He slept with his mouth open, the necessary inelegance of children, and sometimes of men who have finally stopped talking. I sat by the window with a cup I did not drink, and watched the street lamp burn a clean circle on the sidewalk. Somewhere a television concluded its promise and went quiet. The building settled on its haunches. In the other room, the lake kept its coin of dark, flipping it in the wind's pocket. I closed the curtains against the draft and let the fabric fall heavy as a theater curtain after the last line has been spoken. Then I joined the house in its work, keeping the small necessary things where they belonged. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.